Hi, everybody. It's Monday. It's 1 o'clock, and it's time for Pirkei Avot History and Hashkafa, brought to you by the excuse me, the daily Shir program of the Tel Aviv International Synagogue. I had the privilege and honor and real pleasure of spending Shabbat with the inimitable Rabbi Constantine and his family, and to see just up front, really in real time, what a wonderful community it was. I'm I'm grateful to those of you who have participated in these classes that who came over and said hi. It's just a matter of Corona. One of my, I guess, goals in life on my bucket list, whatever the case might be, is to try to turn as many of the virtual friends on my virtual friends on Facebook or Twitter into real live relationships. At least we could know each other or meet each other, get to know each other a little better. Okay, so we are actually continuing in our discussion of the Mishnah in the second chapter of Pirkei Avot, Mishnah 5 or 6, depending on how there are different traditions as to how the Mishnayot here are divided. We had started last week. This is a statement of a series of educational statements by Hillel HaZaken, who lived at the end of the first millennium BCE and the beginning of the beginning of the first millennium CE. We started by discussing the pair of the couplet. That's a great word. The couplet, that a person who is totally uneducated cannot really be God-fearing. We looked at that in depth. And below Amaretz Chassid, and a person who is uneducated cannot really be a Chassid. We started defining the Chassidut. We started defining the word Chassid in its classical context. That a Chassid is a person who is spiritually very, very, very lively, spiritually very, very creative. A person who longs to do more for God and for the community than he actually is required to. The word Chassid is derived from the word Chesed, grace, loving kindness, which is perceived in Judaism as something which flows out of oneself. When it's Gomel Chesed, it comes out of when you do Masa Chesed, an act of Chesed. That really is, it's a hands-on thing. You can't do Chesed by writing a check. Chesed is always involved with getting your hands dirty and getting down there and inside. There's no such thing as a virtue. Well, to think about it, but in principle, there'd be no room for virtual Chesed. Certainly, Chesed requires the ability to be able to have the person who's receiving it, or those around him or her that's receiving it, feel the intensity and the sincerity of the person who's doing things. Write a check; it's very nice, it's stucco, but it's something. The interpersonal piece is missing. Anyways, Chassid is a person who does more, who aspires to do more than the Torah actually demands of an individual. We saw that is expressed in a group of people called the Hasidim Arishonim, the earlier pious people in the time of the Mishnah, who took extra time to meditate before davening and all kinds of other things. There is a long tradition of various types of pietist movements or groups or even individuals, all of which are characterized throughout Jewish history in the Mizrahi world and the Ashkenazi world by this desire that it's nice what the Torah demands, but I want to give God more. I want to live in terms that may be in terms of that may be familiar to you. The idea of the Mishurated in the Torah. So I want to go one step. Further. Okay, so that's a Chassid. That's the word Hassid, because of how should we put this? Because of the vagaries of the development of the Hebrew language, today means something very different. And when we say that a person is a Hassid, it usually means something very, very different. Hassid, in common parlance, is a devotee. He is a Hassid of so and so. So he is a Hassid of the Bobova Rebbe, or he's the Hassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or he is the Hassid of Rabbi Steinsaltz, or he's a Hassid of Rabbi Soloveitchik, or a Hassid of Rav Kook. The word Hassid actually in that context it means the polar opposite. In other words, rather than being a person who actually is autonomous and does more on their own and their inspiration comes from within, the Hassid is a person who's dependent, as a devotee. He or she takes their cue from somebody else. They want to be like somebody else. They want to depend on somebody else. In its least attractive form, a Hassid in that regard is I guess is like a religious groupie. I mean, I don't know what else. I don't know what other word to use. So the question is, how did those words get inverted? What happened? So the truth of the matter is that the reason why the word Hassid, the word means both, or actually, it means both, and actually more the opposite of the original meaning, is because in contemporary Hebrew we don't distinguish between the two largely. Don't distinguish between the two ways of pronouncing Hebrew words. There are two ways of putting emphasis on a syllable. One is called mil'el, where you put the emphasis on the first syllable or the early syllable, and milra, which is when you put the emphasis on the second or the last syllable of a word. Milra is generally associated with Sephardic pronunciation, and milel, which is emphasizing the first syllable or an earlier syllable, is generally associated with Ashkenazis, with the way Jews pronounced Hebrew in Eastern Europe and maybe in the Middle Ages. Who knows? We don't have the recordings from the 14th century. It's hard to know. Point is, though, that that the word Hassid, when you properly pronounce Hebrew, the word Hassid can also be pronounced Chassid, and they mean two different things. When we speak about a Hassid, we're talking about this original meaning of self-sufficiency and personal autonomy and seeking to do more because I'm personally inspired. A Chassid is the opposite. The word Chassid, or the pronunciation Chassid, is associated with one pietist movement which turned everything upside down, and that is the Chassidut that was developed, or whose development is attributed to the 18th century figure, great individual, Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer Baal Shem Tov, who founded Polish Hasidus, or Polish Hasidut, which is really Hasidus, not Hasidut, because it's the opposite. What am I talking about? Hasidus, Polish Hasidus, and that from the best comes all the other, Hasidus at Chernobyl and Bela and Bobov and all the various courts that we know about. Polish Hasidus was predicated upon the Kabbalah of the Arizal. The Arizal, very quickly, and he lived in the 5th, 16th century, he also turned Jewish mysticism upside down, but he taught that the world was basically created flawed. That there was a primal disaster that took place at the time of the creation of the world, and the world was created flawed. Okay. What God then did was give the Torah to the Jews, so that by learning Torah and performing mitzvot, every single mitzvah that is performed corrects something, some infinitesimal correction in the world. That's called tikkun. That's really what tikkun olam means in a Kabbalistic context. Tikkun olam in the Gemara means something else totally. Every single time a person does a mitzvah, you end up correcting the world a little bit and bringing the Geula and bringing the Mashiach a little bit closer. Which means that's very heady stuff. because basically what the Ari was teaching was that despite the fact that at the time in the 16th century the Jews were not on the historical stage, we were off the historical stage. Jews only returned to history with Zionism, and with the return to Zion, with the return to Eretz Israel. But what the Ari is basically saying is, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Because by doing mitzvahs, you really are you're just as powerful. You're more powerful. You're more important to the world seeing its reaching its full fruition and its plenitude by doing mitzvahs. Okay. One of the results of the spread of this doctrine, and it spread through the Jewish world like wildfire, was that it helped foment and intensify. Jews always hoped for the Mashiach, but this really intensified things because now it's in our hands to do it. We can really get things going, and we can really have an effect on the universe and bring the Mashiach faster by something that we do. And Gershom Shalom, the famous Jewish historian of Kabbalah, assumed, and I think he's right. I mean, who am I? But claimed that the fact that every Jew, that everybody sort of got into this very, very heavy duty, you can bring Mashiach yourself kind of mentality, that was responsible for creating the background and for setting the stage for the biggest disaster, one of the two most disastrous Jewish messianic movements in history. One of them was Christianity, from the point of view of Judaism, and the other one is Shabtai Tzvi. Okay. Shabtai Tzvi ended up in a disaster. Shabtai Tzvi ended up converting to Islam. That's a whole discussion which is not for now. But the fallout was disastrous. As a result, interestingly, across the Jewish world, there were those who argued that yes, we accept the teachings of the Ari as normative, but it's dangerous to put that kind of spiritual power in the hands of the average person. And slowly but surely, a process began by which involvement in Kabbalah became the prerogative of rabbis whose specialties was Kabbalah, who were of impeccable piety, of impeccable spirituality, of impeccable learning. In the Mizrahi world, in the Sephardic world, you find more and more the creation of Kabbalistic yeshivot for special people, but not the average person isn't involved in it so much. And in the Ashkenazic world, you have, interestingly, either the removal of Kabbalah and all of its appurtenances, or many of its appurtenances, from daily life, from the prayer book, and so on. And in Eastern Europe, in the circles around the students of the Baal Shem Tov, which people who tried to lead a religious revival in the early part of the 18th century onward, the argument became, I know it's a long-winded way of doing this, but I can't help it. The idea developed of the tzaddik, of the Rebbe, of the Admor. What's a tzaddik? What's a Rebbe? What's an Admor? An Admor, a Rebbe, a tzaddik is the person who knows how to do the tikkunim. He is above reproach, and his piety is above reproach. And he is the only person who is able to make the changes and to perform mitzvot on such a level that he can actually advance the geula. So then the question became, okay, what about everybody else? I mean, you've got most Jews aren't on that level. So the response was, if a Jew attaches himself to a Rebbe, to a tzaddik, vicariously speaking, the tzaddik will do whatever is necessary Kabbalistically to bring the geula closer. And as that happens, and certainly when it happens, when the final fruition of the Messianic age comes, he'll bring his coattails all of his disciples. The people who were the disciples were called Hassidim. So here the word Hassid, or Hassid, was now pronounced in Millel, The word Hassid now becomes not an autonomous, independent person who makes their own way in trying to do more than the Torah requires, but rather a person who is dependent upon the tzaddik, who will bring them to, who will bring the chassidim to the final geula, and who through the tzaddik can actually have a share in advancing the redemption by when the tzaddik does these tikkunim, when he performs mitzvot with the right intention and out of the right point of Kabbalistic view. Okay, so that being the case, we have. Okay, so therefore, that being the case, the word chassid changes. That's the background. Interestingly, there's a famous biography of the Vilna Gaon, the great opponent of Chassidut, of Chassidus, of Polish Chassidus, and the biography is called Hagon HaChassid MiVilna. The Vilna Chassid, the so on. This was an attempt to restore or to argue back that no, you get the word Chassid wrong. That Hassid really means a person who's autonomous, who's on a higher level of learning and stuff like that, not a person who's on a low level of learning and has to hang on to the coattails of some rebbe in order to be able to make it. Interestingly, on the side of the wall here, I have my smicha from Rav Soloveitchik, and it says Yosef Dov ben Gaon Chassid Moshe Halevi Soloveitchik. That it says Joseph Dov, the son of the Gaon, the genius, Chassid, the pious person, but not pious in the sense of being a chassid. They were misnagdim, they were anti-chassidic, but rather in the original So what's this got to do with us? Lo ha'ma'aretz chassid. Okay, so one of the things that characterized Chassidus, certainly in its earliest generations, was this concern for the non-lettered. I told you a few stories that in to a certain degree, it was the Chassidus was perceived as the rebellion of the lower classes, the unlettered classes. That there's a place in the worship of God even for those who are not great scholars. Jews have gotten overly intellectualized and gotten overly become elitist, and the Chassid is the simple Jew. And everybody should feel it's to use the word that everybody loves today. It's inclusive. It's a very inclusive form of Judaism. So our Mishnah became part of the argument between those who had the more elitist position that really the hierarchy is that people who are learned are more important, and that the lower end, the people who are less learned have to be dependent upon them, and so on. And the Rebbe said no, that the people who are less learned have a right to their own their place in the worship of God. So the response, so what the and there was a sort of sense. It's not true. Many Chassidim were very well learned, but there was a sense in the propaganda of the Lithuanian Jews who opposed Chassidut. There's the idea that Chassidim are not educated, so the opponents of Chassidut. This is a long way of getting to this point. The opponents of Chassidut would say, if you have no education whatsoever, you can't be God-fearing. V'lo amaretz chassid. You can't. You think you can make a chassid out of a person who's an ignoramus? Not true. All right. Anyways, that was a long way of saying that. Okay, let's go on to the next the next couplet. Couplet number one, or the part number one. Below habaishan lamed, a person who is shy, a person who's embarrassed, can never learn. Such a person can't learn. Below a kapdan melamed, and a person who is overly strict, a person who's really strict, a kapdan is a fire and brimstone teacher, won't be an effective teacher. Obviously, by the way, what do you say? In Bor Yerechet V'lo Amaretz Chassid, okay? And who are the people, and how do you get out of being either a Bor, which means you have absolutely no education whatsoever, or an Amaretz, which means you have basic education, but you really, you've got a long way to go, is to study. So then the question is, okay, what has to happen from the point of view of the student to ameliorate his or her situation, and who should the Amaritz or the Boer go to study? Obviously, Kaptan. So the question is, what's wrong with both of these? What's wrong and what's right with both of these categories? Okay, Loa Baishan Lamed. So first of all, as in so many things in Birkei Avot, it's pretty self-evident. I mean, if we all know, don't be shy. In fact, I did, just for funsies, I did a search. I put in 4 words. The shy in Google. The shy person can't learn. Okay, I got 137 million hits, starting with a bunch of videos about how to develop self-confidence so you can study. Okay, so obviously, this is a universal moment. If you're embarrassed, if you're shy, you can't learn. But there's more to it. What does it mean to be shy? What does it mean to be shy? So first of all, shyness presumes that you are hesitant to interact with somebody else. Why? Because you don't want to look stupid. First of all, you might be afraid of opening up anyways. You're afraid of calling attention to yourself anyways. That's number one. Beyond that, and by the way, I think that's probably has been made worse in the world of our electronic universe, and certainly in the world of Corona, when we've all been so isolated. I think we've all sort of like acquired for ourselves a kind of acquired agoraphobia, fear of going out into the world under all circumstances. Anyways, but that doesn't. Who says you can't study that way? Who says you can't learn that way? I can be quiet, and I can sit there and absorb information. And so, if I don't want to open my mouth, if I don't want to call attention to myself, so fine. Right? So why is that not called? Why is that saying? Why is Hillel saying that disqualifies or prevents you from ever studying? Because it's inevitable, if you're studying something new, that you're not going to understand, and you're going to want to ask a question, and that's where the problems start, because people don't want to feel stupid, and until you ask a question, you don't know whether the question's good or not. And you always project. I mean, look, I'll speak for myself. I always assume that everybody in the world knows everything that I know and more. So I'm always very hesitant to ask questions at a conference or at a seminar, because I don't want to get laughed at. So I'm very much aware of what that that kind of situation, what kind of challenge that presents you. But the truth of the matter is, it may very be the question is a good question. It may very well be that 35,000 other people in the room are thinking the same thing, but they're also afraid as well. And in addition, even if your question was stupid, and there is no such thing as stupid question, that's important to know also. And if you don't ask, and you try to figure it out yourself, or if you assume what you think you know, then what's going to happen is that you're going to take. It's like driving and you take the wrong right turn. Once you take the wrong right turn, you may in the end keep following the directions the way that you have them down. But once you've taken that right turn the wrong way, you're going to end up, way off the map. You're going to, or off a cliff or something. The point being that Boer Bashan Lamed means that your success in being a Yirei Shamayim, let's connect to the first part of the Mishnah, or to being a Hassid, depends on getting over your shyness. There are other kinds, but it's interesting. There are 2 types of shyness that I've encountered, at least in my life, and I see, and it's more or less reflected in many of the traditional commentaries, all of which, by the way, interesting. I wasn't, often I find I point out to you where commentators on Pirkei Avot will make statements that seem to have a sort of contemporary resonance, and they reflect the realities in which the writer or the commentary is living. Here, everything is, this is like transcendent. This is true in all places at all times. So anyways, so sometimes you don't open your mouth because you feel inadequate, and who am I, and everybody's so smart, and why do I know? Some people don't open their mouths out of arrogance, in the sense that on the one hand you think you don't know what you've always put up a front that you're like this hotshot, and thinks you're the hotshot, that's gonna. It's not just a matter of like who's this guy coming and they're just beginning and so on, and why are they in this class, but rather the person is, well, how could somebody ostensibly so learned make such a stupid mistake, or ask such a stupid question. And there are people like this. There are people that need to put up a front, and they pretend to know, but they don't know, and they're paralyzed. They can't ask because everybody thinks that they do know. So you're sort of digging yourself deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But that's another type of law by Shan Lamed. Also, there's a I don't remember which, as long as we're talking about Chassidim today. I don't remember which Chassidish Rebbe it was, of which whom it was spoken, and I understand that there's a parallel story among Eastern religious masters as well. A student comes to study with a master. Let's assume it's a Hussid that's coming to study with a Rebbe, and he wants to learn X, whatever X was. And he stays and he stays and he stays and he stays and he stays, and doesn't come. What he wanted to achieve, he just couldn't. So he asks tells the Rebbe, I'm leaving. This is not for me. So the Rebbe says, you know what though? Before you go, let's have a toast. Let's have a drink. So they bring out two goblets or two wine cups, whatever it is, and the Rebbe and then the Rebbe says, "Okay, fill the cups." He fills the cups, and when the cups are full, the guy says to the Rebbe says to the student or the potential student, the student now wants to leave. He says, "So fill my cup." So the student says, "What do you mean fill your cup? I fill the cup there's no place to put anything. If I put more wine in the cup, it'll spill over. I mean, that's not an option." So the Rebbe says, that's exactly the reason why your time with me didn't work. He said, you came here full of everything you'd studied and full of yourself. If you want to be able to study and to imbibe somebody else's wine, you have to empty a little bit of yourself to allow for what the other person can give you to enter. In other words, lo habaishan lamed would then mean that a person who you can't study, you can't learn. Study's not the word. Learn, really, if you are so satisfied with what you have. Because shyness can also be a matter of I'm self-sufficient. And only when you open up can you receive God's blessing. Can you receive Torah? Now, I'll just mention in passing that Rabbi Yonah Garondi in the 13th century notes that it's interesting. Aren't we supposed to? Why did Hillel say that the person who's shy can't really learn? Why emphasize that? Why emphasize that quality or that activity? He says because in general, humility is a good thing. Humility is a good thing, and you should be humble, and you should be shy in the sense of being deferential, not totally whatever, but deferential. deferential and respectful. When it comes to study, however, when it comes to learning Torah, there's no room for that, because that affects both the teacher and the student, and there's no room for false modesty, or even real modesty. You should get out there and be there, and if you have a good thing to say, you say it. If you have a bad thing to say, then you'll be corrected, and that's the only way to grow. Okay, so that is so much for Loa by Shan Lamed. Next week we will talk about Loa Kaptan Milamed, and in the meantime, have a great week, and we'll see you. Oh, and as usual, if you want, you're invited. Please do share this. Share the video. Share the site of the Tel Aviv International Synagogue. You can. Somebody asked me last week where they can find all my other shiurim. You can find them either on YU Torah, yutorah.org, in MP3 form, or I have videos, tons, on my YouTube channel, which is just under my name, and my name WOOLF. So we'll see you next time. Bye.